lines. Given lines L and M, so we see the green and the blue line. Part A says find the slope of each line. So to find the slope, we should think of the slope. We usually use the letter M for it. So M is called rise over run. That's one way. Another one is change in Y over change in X. It's another way to think of it. And another way to think of this, which comes from the change in Y over the change in X, is Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. So we're going to talk about all three of these. Well, not all three of these. We're going to talk about these two here, rise over run, and actually using this formula here to find slope. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to find the slope of the green line. So now, using this idea of rise over run, what I'm going to do is I see no points on this line, but understand this. There are infinitely many points on this line. So just remember that. So I can put a point anywhere I choose. I could put a point here. I could put it here. I could put it here. But essentially what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to put it in a place where it can result in a good value for both X and Y. Okay, so that's the idea here. So when I look at this, I see that this one might be a good point because I can see here that that's right at 1, and that's right at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that's right at -7. So that would be a really good point to use for that reason. So 1, -7. So now I'll need another point here to even deal with that idea of rise over run. So where am I going to put that point at? This one here also looks like a good point. And the reason what makes it a good point is because it's right on one of the crosshairs there on the whole entire grid there. So it meets right at a corner of one of those squares. That's what makes it a good value to use. So for that one's going to be -1, 0. All right, cool. Now we have a couple of good points here. We can talk about that idea of rise over run. Rise simply means Y direction, and that's why this is change in Y here. Okay, so that all kind of corresponds together there. So the Y means I'm going to change in Y. So I'm going to start from -1, 0. And notice what I do. My rise is actually going to go downward. And it goes down 7. So there, that's actually a -7 there. So when I talk about my slope of my green line, the rise is going to be -7 because it went down 7. And then to get back on my line, I'm going to have to go right. Now, that's always the point here. Essentially, I'm not just trying to get off the line to get back on the line. I'm trying to take one point and taking square paths, end up back to another point on my line. So that's M equals -7 for my rise. Okay, so then I'm going to go to the right here. 2. So going to the right is positive. Now, if I was going to the left, that would be negative because that's my negative X direction. That's the idea. And my Y direction, since I'm going down, that's a negative Y direction. So my slope is -7/2. Now, that's just using this idea of rise over run. Let's take a look at the other one now, the other formula here. Okay, so that would say M equals Y2, oops, not Y squared, Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. So how this works is these subscripts here simply mean we're talking about 2 points. This is the first point. That's the Y value of the first point. And this is the X value of the first point. And this is the Y value of the second point, and that's the X value of the second point. So essentially, we just have to pick one to be one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say y1 is going to equal the -1, 0, and the y2 is going to equal the 1, -7. Now, order doesn't matter. You just have to pick one. Okay, so that means for my slope, I need my y2 first, I guess I should say there. So my y2 is here, and that is -7. So -7 minus, and the minus just always comes straight down. Remember that. I don't care what's going on, put the minus there. And then the y1 is here, which is 0. So minus 0. And that's all over x2 here, which is 1, minus x1. x1 is -1. Okay, now this is going to be -7 on top. And on the bottom, 1 minus a negative is really plus, so that's going to be a 2. -7/2. So once I have a picture, it's very easy for me to do this by hand. Not by hand, it's all by hand. It would be easier for me to do it just by the graph instead of going through these points. It's not necessary, but we can see that it results in the same thing. As soon as I understand rise over run, I can find these very quickly once I have a graph drawn. It's easy to find the lines, the slope of the lines. I just pick 2 points on my graph and then run 1 point to the other point. Now, I could have also gone this way. So that means I would go up 7. So that would be a +7, wouldn't it? Yep. And then I would go to the left 2. So that would be a -2. Now, this has always been a weird thing for people, this idea of negative. Is this the same thing as 7 over -2? It actually is, because a negative over a positive is negative, and a positive divided by a negative is negative. And I could also, if I wanted to be real fancy, write it this way. And those are all the same. Notice they all have one negative, which makes them equivalent. Okay, now if I had 2 negatives on there, oh no, a negative divided by a negative is positive. People do that a lot, but be careful. So now that we see the slope is -7/2, we're done for the first one for part A. Now let's do the slope for the line M. So again, I'm going to find 2 points, and those are easy here because I see that there's one here and one here right away. The intercepts. So I'm just going to use those. So now, again, I'm just going to do rise over run. But let me label this point. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that would be -5, 0. And then this would be 2, 0. So then what I would do is I would go up 2. So my rise is positive. And then my y value, or my x value, my change in x, would be 5. And that would be positive. So my rise would be 2. So for this one, my m, my slope meaning, not my letter m, would be 2 over 5. So that's the slope of that one. So you see how quick and easy that is. It's not as messy as finding the points, but we're going to do the points too just to get a little more practice with it. So that's going to be m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So then that's going to be these 2 points here. So I'm going to call 2, 0, x1, y1. And I'm going to call -5, 0, x2, y2. So that's going to give me, so my y2 is 0, minus, and my y1 is also 0. No, that can't be right. Oh, I screwed up on my points. I'm glad I caught that. I didn't even need to know the points here, but these are backwards. So I'm going to fix those. that should have been 0, 2, not 2, 0. Fix that on your paper if you did that as well. Okay, and one good thing to notice there is when I had that 0 minus 0 there, I know that's not the characteristic of a line that's slanted. That's how I knew that it was wrong. At least one of them was. Okay, so then let's try it again. So my y2 is 0, and my y1 is 2. Whoops. Minus 2. And that's all over my x2 is negative 5 minus my x1, which is 0. So I get negative 2 over negative 5, which equals positive 2/5. Okay, so that's my slope for that one. Is that the same thing I got for the other? Yes, it is. So there we go. We see that they're the same, and a negative over a negative is positive. Okay, another thing to notice here before we finish this video is that notice with the green line that the slope, as I go from left to right, it's going downward. So we kind of say that it's decreasing. When we have this decreasing scenario here, that's telling us that this slope is negative. So right away, I should know just by looking at the line, it should end up being negative. Okay, that's just a nice little indicator. Just like I had the indicator when I had the 0 on the top, I knew something was wrong. All that other information should complement what I get. So if it doesn't add up, then something's off, something went wrong. So I'm kind of glad I made that mistake there so you could see that. And the same thing for the M line now. Notice this, what's going on there? Not the same thing, but another thing. That's increasing here, right? As I go from left to right. Since that is increasing, that tells me that that slope should be positive. And notice what we get for that, a positive 2/5. So a lot of those things can kind of help us along the way to, even though we don't use those other methods, it should show that it complements each other. There it is.